I am thrilled to introduce our keynote talk, Accelerating Low Carbon Infrastructure at Scale. And I'm so pleased to be joined by Mark McKenna, the Global Director of ESG at Arcadis, who's an enterprise customer of OneClick LCA, as well as Panu Pasanen, the CEO and founder of OneClick LCA. Both of you, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
My pleasure.
Cool. So let's just dive right in. Mark, tell us more about Arcadis and also your work there.
Yeah, sure. So happy to talk about Arcadis. We're a 40,000 person business. Engineering and advisory is the core of what we do, and we work across most of the regions globally, effectively to accelerate a planet positive future in both built assets and natural assets. And myself, I run global sustainability within our business, which is a centralized function that scales up and drives sustainability into everything we do.
Brilliant. Panu, same for you. Just please tell our audience about OneClick LCA and your work there as CEO.
Yeah, so OneClick LCA is powering the makers of a zero carbon future like Arcadis, and we provide software, lifecycle assessment software, and other tools like circularity, biodiversity, and things around that help to design, deliver, and keep going resilient and low carbon buildings, infrastructure, and other assets. We also support manufacturing industry with environmental product declarations so that the designers have access to reliable data.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Let's move forward. And Mark, I will address you first. I would love to learn more about what Arcadis is doing to decarbonize infrastructure.
Yeah, sure. Happy to, Abigail. So, well, firstly, I would say it all really starts with a commitment. So in November last year, Arcadis launched its latest 3-year strategy, which is to accelerate a planet positive future. And as part of that, we actually committed to assess whole of life carbon on all new major projects by 2026. So the reason we made that commitment is to hold ourselves accountable, but also really to act as a mechanism to then systemically embed that culture of valuation of carbon in projects. So really that's the first place that we started, is to make the commitment. What we're actually doing then is, of course, working with OneClick across the entire business to embed the skills, the training, the platform into as many parts of our business. So then the whole business moves together, and we do that on all projects across all regions. So really that's the core of why we're committed to doing it, and the reason, I think, for the enterprise partnership.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and doing it across so many regions as you work in is a real challenge because there's different levels of maturity. So what would be, I think, interesting to hear about is how do you bring on board those parts of the world where there's a bit less knowledge or maturity in terms of client side to demand this, because some places you're fortunate that the client already is asking you to do this work, and others you need to come then with the approach. So can you share about your work in that in those cases?
Yeah, sure. So you're absolutely spot on, Panu. One of the challenges we do have is the varying maturities across markets. But what we also find is it's not necessarily just markets, but the maturity difference is also in the sectors as well. So in most operating countries that we're in, there is actually a degree of expertise in that market. It may just be concentrated in a certain sector. So that's the challenge that we see, is not just market-based, but it's also not just geographically based, but also market and sector-based. I think what we've tried to do so far to try and build the maturity uniformly in Arcadis is, of course, working with yourselves to develop a customized training program for not just sustainability consultants doing whole life carbon work, but actually for all areas of our business. And using that as the basis of a community of practice that is fastly scaling up to try and, again, get that uniformity, irrespective of the market, irrespective of the location, and even irrespective of the project type to some extent, which of course is complex, but that is effectively the goal, and we're really pleased to have you help us on that journey as well.
Great. Let's move on and talk about how Arcadis is accelerating low carbon performance at scale?
Well, I think I started to touch on it right at the end and talking to Panu around how we work across the regions, and that is one of the really important aspects of our work is to work at scale and specify performance at scale. You really have to have a familiarity about the assets that you're working on, and that's, I think, a lot more easy to do in certain mature service lines or project types we work in, like commercial buildings, for example. That's a really easy area for us to scale because it's a really mature, ripe environment in an easy to abate sector on carbon. But that's just less so in different regions. So in different sectors like wastewater, remediation and restoration projects, all the other non-typical projects where you'll have seen whole life carbon come up. So what we're trying to do is, for each of the core areas of our business, we're trying to set performance expectations on how you assess and value whole life carbon or total carbon, but then what are the easy minimum steps that you have to take to get to a level to decarbonize projects. That is really what we're trying to do. So it's working with different sectors, parts, and service lines in the business to do that. And unfortunately, you can't scale that uniformly across each project type or each sector, right? You do have to work in a tailored way in parts of the businesses. So, for example, when we work on mobility projects, there's a certain expectation on the balance of infrastructure typologies and components that's different to, say, on wastewater treatment. So we just can't uniformly take the same approach to decarbonisation on each of those. So that's kind of how we try and break it up a bit, I think.
We did a study on quite a range of LCA and embodied carbon expert that we launched earlier in the year, and we found that up to 88% of the respondents found that they have challenges getting data from manufacturers, and you're dealing then with let's say a very broad tail of suppliers. So you have people who are specializing in, let's say, power transmission equipment and wastewater systems and everything in addition of the steel and concrete. So how do you tackle the challenge, and who do you need to help you with that challenge? Like, it's getting the supply chain of the specialized things, especially, I mean, concrete and asphalt, maybe. I don't know if you find them easy to deal with, but at least they are somewhat easier.
Yeah, I think certainly, Panu, the top 3 or the top 5 material components that make up a lot of construction impact, concrete, steel, and glass, for example. I think it would be fair to say, on the whole, the relationship and the data certainty and quality of those particular supply chain products and materials is a lot more mature. So I think the relationships that we have are pretty good, or consistently we're getting the data that is giving us a good degree of certainty. The other thing I would say, though, is Arcadis, traditionally, we are not only simply an engineering consultant, but we also are part of the direct contracting of projects as well in some of our locations. So in some ways, we actually become the contractor as well as become the consultant. So in that respect, it's great because then we get a really first-hand, on-the-ground understanding of our own projects from not just the specification side of things, but the real as-built, installed supply chain side. And in fact, that's one of the important things for Arcadis too. When we think about our whole life carbon impact as a business, traditionally businesses like ourselves in professional services, you would assume, are really focused on the operation of the buildings that we sit in, the offices that we run. But actually, because we do a whole lot of direct contracting in parts of our business, that is actually part of our value chain that we have to work on as well. So again, having that contractor consultant type blend across some parts of our business, it really helps us get close to the action, gets us really close to the answers, which is ultimately what we need to try and get city of outcomes, I think.
Yeah, that sounds great. And when you are working as actually the prime contractor, then may I ask, do you manage to develop your supply chain to get more mature in terms of your need and your ask, like to get them engaged on product development and product transparency journey with you?
I think where there's opportunity, we always do that. And I think that stems back to our commitment as an organisation that, our place in the market is, I think, we are a market shaper. We don't make the market, but we have the opportunity to shape it in ways that accelerates a planet positive future, aligns with the strategy. So, in that respect, I think that really helps, I think.
Mark, I'm curious how you are doing this across the different types of infrastructure projects that you work on.
Sure, yeah. Well, like I said at the start when discussing with Panu, that when we say infrastructure, it means a lot of different things. So we have natural infrastructure, built infrastructure, and in-built we have mobility, utilities, a really broad spectrum of infrastructure. So how we're scaling up, of course, is quite specific to those sectors. But what I would say, and it's something that we're really passionate about, is in order for us to scale up the understanding of whole life carbon and therefore design more comprehensive data-led solutions in that respect, it's not about building capability in siloed parts of the business. It's about embedding the understanding across all parts of the business. So when, for example, we are working through the training program with Panu and yourselves teams, it contains a broad spectrum of people across the entire business, some of which maybe haven't actually been in the space of whole life carbon valuation. And so that is, for us, is the only way to truly work at scale, is to really embed that in non-traditional, perhaps sustainability illiterate parts of sectors in our supply chains in our business. So for us, that's key. It's about everyone moving together as opposed to having a set of siloed experts in the corner doing all the work.
Yeah, that's I think really interesting. So we have seen like airports were one of the first, for obvious reasons, to jump on the ball, and data centers have been pushing, and they are pretty advanced already in this compared to other type of infrastructure, and rail and road in many countries. But we like wastewater handling or other type of municipal infrastructure that has been really a laggard. So only pioneering locations have worked on that. So which sectors do you find the hardest to move along? I mean, I can disclose power sector from our side, but I mean, maybe you have some other perceptions to share. And what do you do about that?
Yeah, sure. No, great question. I think without sitting on the fence here, I would say that for us, it's not necessarily the hardest sectors. I think it's just the complexity of the sectors. So, for example, in the environmental restoration space, it's actually a heavily regulated environment, and many of our clients and projects in that space are already measuring carbon to some extent. So it's not so much about that being a challenge to value carbon, it's maybe to value it in a way that looks at the entire whole life value chain of that asset. That's probably the difference. I would agree in power sector it's definitely a challenge. But again, it's very specific. So we have mobility projects here in Sydney, where I'm based at the moment, and some of the certifications and expectations from the local, state and federal governments do really facilitate working heavily on a whole life carbon basis when you talk about mobility infrastructure. But I can point to exactly the same type of project in other parts of the world where that kind of legislative lever or even market condition doesn't really facilitate the same outcome. So it's not even for us necessarily which sector's hard. It can actually be more geography based actually. So I think that's where, there's certainly an assumption that private sector investment and markets will drive innovation, but I think you do need both in that respect. You do need some kind of levers for, especially in public infrastructure, that are legislated in that really give us a platform to then systemically embed that valuation of carbon as an equal metric to money as well.
I'd like to ask, this is for Mark and also for Panu, about just kind of scaling this capability across an organization. And maybe, Panu, I could pass this to you first, and you can talk about some of the ways that OneClick LCA is supporting organizational scale of these capabilities within Arcadis and other clients.
Yeah, so sure. So beside Mark used the term communities of practice, but then we have also professions and roles. And uh, sometimes, you have a person who's engaged in a project in a really early phase to think about the strategy, how you go about the project, and the information they actually have available and what they could use is very different. So we provide this early design software. Carbon Designer 3D, it's called, that allows you to model actually different ranges of options with very minimal amount of information, of course, in a directional accuracy level, but just in minutes, right? So you can think about what would it mean if you do A or B or C. So you get an understanding where are your hotspots and how you should approach and what should your priorities be. Then we have obviously lots of engineering and design experts, and they work on BIM plugins. So we have launched this year, for infrastructure specifically, Autodesk Civil 3D, and Bentley also announced very recently one-click as a integration to iTwin. So those are important ways for engineering to be able to work with it. And lastly, then we get to the project management, procurement, supply specification roles, and there we launched Materials Compass, which is a software which allows you to discover sustainable products and compare them quickly when you're not actually the person designing, but you're looking at what do you want to procure. And these are tools basically that allow you to look at the problem in the specific phase and in the specific role and with the specific information you have at your disposal. Those are, I think, from a just software point of view, the major categories.
I may just add to that, Panu, too. I think one of the things that has been great working with yourselves is we have product level LCA specialists sitting in Romania and Belgium, and we have architectural specialists who are in the US, and the variation of skills that are needed is genuinely pretty different. And I think one of the great things that has worked, I think, for us is identifying the different types of groups and level and depth of knowledge you have to go in it and what stage. So, and that has worked really well for us because, for example, cost and commercial management is a really big part of Arcadis's work. And when we talk about whole life carbon in that sphere, we talk about that from the point of view of an adjacent metric to cost, and as a service, as a distinct output. Whereas when we talk about it from an architectural point of view, it's more as a more fluid optimization type experience. And I think even just the training and the experience that we need to blend into those different service lines and areas is really why the flexibility in the program has worked well, which is really important for us. And yeah, it's worked really well.
Both of you, we unfortunately have to soon close out this keynote conversation, but I did want to ask if both of you what your top takeaway would be for our audience today, streaming in from around the world. And maybe Mark, I could pass this question to you first. And if you have just like one thing you would like to leave our audience with today, what would that be?
I think one thing would certainly be based on my aspiration, which is that the evaluation or understanding of whole life carbon does genuinely have to be something that is no longer niche but systemic and embedded in everything we do, so that it does really become another data point from which to optimize and deliver far better solutions that tackle some of the biggest challenges we're facing in the world today. So it's really, for me, the takeaway is everyone needs to become literate in whole life carbon valuation, because then only that way will then the industry move to go together at the scale and pace that we need to.
Yeah, I can piggyback on that one. So the work Arcade is doing is really important because we need everyone on board. And some of these infrastructure sectors, they are like harder. They have less competence. They have less background in dealing with carbon from this point of view, at least. But we need to bring everybody along on this, and it's possible. Arcade is doing it successfully, and I would encourage everybody else to go after all of their businesses and not just the usual suspects, because we need scale for impact.
We need scale for impact. Absolutely. Panu, Mark, thank you both so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.